President of the Webby Awards. I'm coming to you from our offices here in New York City. We are so happy to have you join us today. As part of a long-term partnership with the NAACP, we are so excited to kick off our very first discussion for our event series, Unpacked. We're convening influential thought leaders to explore the most pressing issues facing communities of colour online, with the objective of providing actionable insights into how we as an industry and as individuals can better advocate to work towards building and defending a more inclusive internet. The internet has become one of the most effective tools to carve spaces for creativity, connect communities to one another, and necessary resources and opportunities. However, platforms are still struggling to address issues that are negatively impacting communities of colour, from the spread of misinformation in communities impacted by the pandemic, to moderation issues and biases on the platforms that target users of colour and keep content creators uncredited. And of course, the issue of online access itself is hugely important. This series will explore these issues, speak with advocates who are active in working to address and provide steps we can all take into our lives to better advocate online. Today, we are meeting to discuss the impact of misinformation, disinformation, and fake news campaigns on communities of colour. We have two incredible experts here for our conversation. I want to introduce XiXi Yang. XiXi is an award-winning entertainment journalist, fashion and lifestyle influencer, and the founder of XiXi Media. As an entertainment journalist, XiXi is best known for her work on CNN and the HLN network, and as the first and only Asian American woman to anchor live from the red carpet for the Associated Press, which she does in both English and Mandarin. XiXi, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
And we also have Vanessa Mbonu. Vanessa, who is Vice President of Digital Marketing and Communications at the NAACP, where she has the responsibility of communicating the historic organisation's federal advocacy and policy initiatives through digital campaigns, media relations, and integrated marketing. Passionate about equality-centred policies which uplift the Black and immigrant and disenfranchised communities, she has an extremely successful background in PR journalism and is a graduate of St John's University and the London School of Economics and Political Science. Vanessa, we are so excited to have you kick off this series today.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here as well.
So we have a lot to talk about, ladies. This time last year, we may have said we are living in the golden age of misinformation, but we're still enduring it and experiencing the long-lasting impacts of different types of misinformation campaigns. We're currently in the middle of another surge of the coronavirus infections fueled by unvaccinated people, many of whom are not vaccinated because of misinformation. Last week was the anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, which was led by the former president and his voter fraud misinformation campaigns, or disinformation campaign. And we continue to see the knock-on effects of this. There is so much to talk about, but let's start talking broadly about disinformation and misinformation and its impact on Black and Asian communities. XiXi, we thought we would start with you, and we wanted to talk about over the last couple of years. Throughout 2020 and 2021, the rise of misinformation has impacted AAPI communities on an interpersonal level, both false information online about Asians and Asian Americans, as well as the information that's circulating within the communities. What are the biggest ways that you've seen the AAPI community impacted by disinformation online?
Absolutely, Claire. I think you really hit the nail on the head with that one because 2020 was such a wake-up call, especially to so many members of the AAPI community. Not only were we fighting against misinformation of all the negative stigma of the phrase, the China virus, as coined by our former president, along with all the hate, misinformation surrounding the origin of the virus, how the virus was brought forth, and how the virus spreads. There were a lot of misinformation amongst members of the AAPI community, predominantly surrounding politics, surrounding the elections, surrounding the vaccine. And I think it really comes down to the dissemination of news. Working as a journalist, I've seen firsthand how different minority groups choose to receive news differently and how information is spread differently for AAPI communities, for instance, as opposed to reading it from mainstream media, reading it from AP, CNN, different outlets. Many of them choose to go on social media platforms to receive their news. And I know Facebook and Twitter has started to regulate the spread of misinformation, but when it comes to platforms like WeChat, there has yet to be any regulation set in place. And there's about 1.2 billion users on WeChat alone. And WeChat is actually the #1 platform where many AAPI members are getting their news from.
So fascinating. I can't wait to delve into some of that stuff with you in terms of politics. Vanessa, in a similar vein, what are some of the ways you've seen the Black community impacted by misinformation or disinformation online?
I mean, the impact of misinformation and disinformation has been just absolutely catastrophic for communities, especially Black communities and other communities of color. It dates as far back as the internet, honestly. It dates even further back than that, but I feel like with social media and the internet, it's very easy to spread information, but it's not as easy to vet that information. And so whether we're talking about the coronavirus, whether we're talking about elections, whether we're talking about sports, celebrity news, it's so easy to just see a whole bunch of junk and people co-signing it. And there's just not enough of vetting, and there's not enough of authenticity and authority on the internet to really curtail this. And so I'm very, very proud of people like XiXi and organizations like the NAACP that work double time to sort of like provide information and resources from credible people, and let people decide for themselves. But yeah, it's been catastrophic for our communities. I think we saw it exacerbated in 2016 even, and then again in 2020. And look at us now, we're in 2022 and we're still talking about it. So it's absolutely had an enormous impact, but we are definitely fighting back on it.
Last week was the anniversary of January 6th insurrection, which was led by the former president and his voter fraud disinformation campaign. And we are continuing to see the knock-on effects of this. It was part of a wide discussion that was happening last week, which marked the anniversary. XiXi, disinformation circulating within the AAPI community was a big topic during the election. Can you talk more about ways you've seen the rise of fake news impact the community? And let's talk a little bit more about the social platforms that you've seen it on.
Absolutely. I've seen so much misinformation being spread on WeChat, WhatsApp, some of the social media platforms. And a lot of them are, honestly, it starts out as a photoshopped article. And I think as a millennial, I think we take it for granted that a lot of us are savvy enough to tell when the font of a title is a little bit off, or the date is crooked, or the author doesn't exist. We know how to Google, we know how to search for real doctors, whether they're licensed, what their credibilities are. And I always encourage every single person to do their research. But when it comes to misinformation in the AAPI community, unfortunately, it has led to a magnitude in rise of anti-Asian sentiment hate crimes. And it breaks my heart to see that I think anti-Asian violence in 2020 rose by 87%, which is so heartbreaking to see. When you take into consideration that more than half of all hate crimes are not reported by members of the AAPI community out of fear for retaliation, out of fear for causing more trouble, or maybe it's the language barrier. So misinformation, to me, ultimately, it's dangerous. It's digital warfare, and it costs lives. And for us, I think every single one of us, we have a sense of responsibility, not just to not take it seriously. We have to inform even our family members of how to properly vet the articles they're reading, the news that they're consuming, to make sure that, we are getting the right facts.
What types of stories did you see circulating during the election?
During the election, because AAPI communities, many of the members tend to be one issue voters where they make a decision on a candidate based off of a single issue. There were a lot of keywords in there to purposely manipulate the groups to vote one way or the other. For instance, I'm Chinese American. A lot of my fellow Chinese Americans, they come from a communist country, and they do not want America to turn into a communist country. That's their biggest fear. And there were just a lot of phrases like communism, socialism being spread around irresponsibly. And I think a lot of those issues have caused this deep mistrust amongst AAPI members across multiple institutions like politics, media, healthcare, right? And it's dangerous because when we're dealing with COVID, and we still have a percentage of members of our community refusing to get vaccinated because they think, they don't believe in the vaccine. To me, that's ludicrous, right? It's science, and we have to believe in medicine.
Yes, that is something that we should believe in. So the stories that are circulating at the moment, the misinformation stories, is that really around, around the science to do with COVID, or is there other stories that are kind of prevalent at the moment as well?
It's usually stories about COVID, stories about President Biden, stories about you name it. I mean, the web is a dark, dark place. A lot of things I've never even thought of, the whole QAnon phenomenon that was huge in the Asian American community, because we have, we're very family oriented communities, and, a lot of mothers got sucked in by using the hashtag Save the Children, right? It seems so harmless. Everyone wants to save children, but then when you start reading into it, you find out that's actually a way for QAnon to penetrate through minority communities.
Yeah. Vanessa, similarly through the 2020 election and beyond, Black and Latino voters were also flooded with disinformation campaigns. One example, as you said, was the example from 2016 with the Blacktivist Facebook group launched by a Russian group. Can you touch on how disinformation online has impacted Black and Brown voters during the election and after the election, and how it manifest?
Of course. And so when it comes to Black voters in the election, the first number one obstacle that we have are just voter suppression laws. There are numerous voter ID laws that are suppressive in nature. There are, discrepancies with polling places and things like that. And so the odds are already stacked against our community when it comes to voting. And I think that the people who are purposely going online to spread this misinformation and disinformation, I think the big thing that we see, the big pardon my terminology, but the elephant in the room is Donald Trump. But there are bad actors all over, and they are on Facebook, and they were saying things like, oh, well, you don't even need to register to vote. Just like send a text to this number and that's it. And people would believe that. And so that, number one, prevented access to the ballot. And then once people got to the ballot, there were things that were like, oh, if you're in line past this time, then you can't even vote, and so on and so forth. And so from every angle, the Black community is really being targeted. And I think the number one thing that stuck out in the 2020 election was this notion that 14% of Black men voted for Donald Trump. And this was a number that was being touted all over the place, not just online, but also by the media. And then the headline will have you think that, oh, well, Black men are sort of like pulling away from the group, and Black men are the reason why, Trump might get in office. And it's like, first of all, where are you getting that number from? And second of all, if that means 86% are not, what other demographic is giving you numbers in 86%? that's still a huge number. And so I always tell people, number one, where did you get that from? Where is your news source? Who wrote it? Who vetted it? And okay, what about the other side of the story? And so I think with elections, it's usually always voter suppression. It's always they're trying to take our vote away from us, whether it's stopping us from getting to the ballot box in the first place, or it's purposely spreading misinformation to sort of divide and conquer. And so I really, really stress that people, when they are, thinking about who to vote for and thinking about, how to just get ready for election day, it's super important to not only watch like the mainstream news, but local elections are just as important. And so don't just get it from one source, get it from 3 sources. If 3 sources are saying the same thing, then okay, you're on the right track. You know what I'm saying? And then also don't go to the obvious source that is biased. You want unbiased information. You never want someone to tell you who exactly to vote for. You want people to tell you about the platforms, and then you are the only person that knows what's important to you. Don't ever allow other people to speak for you. And so those are just some of the ways in which we try to help our communities make better decisions, informed decisions, and not try to sway them in any one way, but also knowing that there are people that are just waiting to prowl and to divide our communities when it comes to politics, to policies, when it comes to candidates, and to just not get sucked into any of that.
So talking about policy and candidates, what are some of the efforts that the NAACP has taken from policy making, educational standpoint to combat the spread of misinformation?
Absolutely. We are targeting everyone who is a foul player. And so I believe it was 2018. Thank you. I believe it was 2018 where we called out Facebook for the role that they played in the 2016 elections and just spreading misinformation. If you remember the Cambridge Analytica hack, it came out that Facebook actually knew of this way longer than they had led us to believe. And so we called them out on that. We had a digital protest where we asked people to sort of log out from Facebook, even if it was just for a day, even if it was for a week, until Facebook really addressed these concerns and, stepped up their game to protect Black communities and other communities of color, because we are the most vulnerable online and we were the ones that were targeted the most. And so from that protest, Facebook did put together a civil rights sort of look, and they put out some statements. Still not enough, but we definitely went right at the source. And then we are also always, asking people to demand laws and policies from their elected officials, make access to the ballot box easier, not harder, so that all of these things that we see on Facebook, and I am an immigrant myself, it's WhatsApp is where all the stuff goes down, so that these distractions are less, I would say, what's the word I'm looking for, are just less destructive to our communities. First, let's get to the ballot box. Let's be able to do that. And then when we get there, then we can talk about, candidates and all that. And then we also provide platforms for these candidates to come and speak to our community. You know what I'm saying? Because it's great to go to CNN. It's great to go to MSNBC or the BBC, but, what about the NAACP? What about, the local grassroots organization here and there? Like, come talk to these people directly so that no one else can, take your words or switch them. You're talking to Black people, and then we give them a platform to ask questions. And so those are just some of the ways we've been able to, cut off access to, like I said, the foul players, giving people the opportunity to ask the questions for themselves and hear it from themselves firsthand, direct from the horse's mouth.
To make informed decisions.
Yes.
And the NAACP can be one of those unbiased places for information, like you were talking about, that people can come to you to find the information. Exactly. So let's move on and talk a little bit about the pandemic. We know that health inequalities have left certain communities more vulnerable to getting the virus and receiving adequate treatment. At the same time, we've really seen misinformation and disinformation particularly impact Black communities during the pandemic, especially when it comes to finding real facts about the virus, vaccines, and healthcare. Vanessa, where have you seen the spread of COVID-19 and vaccine misinformation target Black communities online?
It's everywhere. It's on it. Like I said, WhatsApp is usually the number one culprit of bad information. You see it on Twitter and you see it on Facebook. The thing about Twitter and Facebook and Instagram now is that they have sort of these monitors that tell you, and they push you towards a COVID-19 resource and information center. But I remember it was early back as like January, February 2020, when we were still trying to grab a hold of what exactly is COVID-19, how serious is it? We thought we were going to be in lockdown for about like 2 weeks. It was a huge thing on Twitter where a lot of Black people were like, oh, well, we can't get the virus. Like we're somehow immune to the virus. And it's like, no, you're not immune to it. The reason why you're not seeing people test positive for COVID-19 is because there is no testing in our communities. That is why. And so, and up until about like April or May or so, the CDC was not releasing any like race-related information and data. And so someone said, oh, Black people can't get COVID-19, and it just spread like wildfire. And again, it goes back to what I was saying, where are you getting your information from? And what is the reason? What is the reason for that headline? And so it really took a lot of work to get testing kits into the Black community, to get these numbers reported, to really get trusted messengers. And, when you're hearing, the president say things like the Chinese flu and things like that, it's really confusing. And this was a time when scientists themselves were still also trying to get a hold of it. And so I think that was the number one place where I saw, Black people just not truly understanding how this virus could impact our community until the numbers started to get released. And we were seeing that actually it disproportionately affected Black people because we were heavily represented in the essential workers. And so we were actually contracting COVID-19 and dying from it at higher rates. And then what I call phase 2 of the pandemic, I don't know what phase we're in right now, was when vaccines came out.
Season 3, girl.
It's like, I feel like we're going to be in this thing for a while based off what I see online. But it was phase 2 of the pandemic when the vaccines came out and we're like, oh, this vaccine came out way too early. No. Like, I can't do this. Then people would bring up the Tuskegee experiment. What they didn't have the full story or the full knowledge of actually what happened during Tuskegee. It wasn't that we were getting, injected with things. It was that we were just not getting anything. And so again, it's a lot of relearning and reteaching history. And then it's like this source, this person that is giving you this information, what do they have to gain? And what do they have to lose from telling you this? And so again, groups like, I don't want to just keep promoting, but groups like the NAACP, local organizations, grassroots organizations, health organizations were continuously putting out information and resources and giving data so that people can see for themselves, well, how long does it actually take to make a vaccine? And why is this vaccine coming out a lot quicker? Well, because the whole world has put money towards it. Like, it's stopped our whole world. And so this is kind of the priority right now. That's why it's coming out so fast. If we put this much effort and this much resources behind other vaccines, they would have the same turnaround time as well. And so now it's with the booster shots and what people are calling, and the Omicron, which, people are calling the Omarion, and, masks and things like that. And so I think we're in like phase 3.5 of the pandemic. And so now that we have convinced people to get the vaccines, now it's like, okay, get your booster. You do actually get boosters for other vaccines. You get a flu shot every year. It's not that different. So it's just a constant, reteaching and relearning for people in our community. But I think it's important to be devoted to the work because, these fears aren't coming out of nowhere. Some of them are substantiated, and it's up to us to really provide information, not propaganda, but information.
So you spoke a little bit about what the NAACP is doing, but we've been reading about the COVID No More campaign. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and what you all have been doing?
Yeah, so the COVID No More campaign is really for the Black community. It's like an all-in-one resource center to find out everything you need to know about the virus, and also how our communities are feeling about it as well. And so it's kind of twofold. It helps the Black community. It also helps, scientists and researchers. And we take a bunch of data, we do a lot of polling. And so we're seeing how the Black community is feeling towards the vaccine. And so if we're seeing that, okay, 64%, 74% of Black people think they're going to get the vaccine. Okay, that means we need to do more work to get it up to 100 or like 90s. If we're seeing that, oh, this percent of Black people have had a booster shot, then it's like, okay, what communities can we go to? And then, it also provides a platform for people to find, their nearest vaccine clinic. When we first launched COVID No More, we didn't want to tell people outright, go do this, go get a vaccine, go get a shot. No, we really wanted to provide them with the information for them to make a knowledgeable and an informed decision themselves. As we got out of phase 1.5 and we got to phase 2, we were really seeing that the number of infections were going down, and there was the vaccine got FDA approved versus FDA authorized. And so we were like, it's time to actually take the vaccine. It's time to get your shot, whether you decide which shot you want to take, but it's time to get a shot. This is what this is what the scientists are saying about the booster shots. And along with the written data and the polls and the researching, we also hosted virtual town halls, again, to provide that direct line between scientists and doctors and policymakers and the Black communities themselves, so they can come and ask these questions. And you would be surprised the questions that we get, but it's super important. It's super important for people to be able to feel like, well, Vanessa, you're the vice president of digital marketing. Okay, you don't have a science degree. I want to talk to someone with a science degree who looks like me. I want to hear what they're saying. And so we found that those virtual town halls have been really, really helpful, just to kind of like calm some of those fears and really answer some of those questions. And also for us to understand and hear the reasons why people might have been apprehensive in the first place.
Yeah, and I imagine that the town halls have made a huge difference as well.
They really did.
see the numbers change after you've been hosting the town hall as well. XiXi, why don't you tell us a little bit about the misinformation in the COVID pandemic within the AAPI community as well?
Oh my goodness, ladies, where do I start? First, let's start with the vaccine, right? There are so many Asian Americans, predominantly Chinese Americans. I speak Mandarin, so I'm seeing all the WeChat, WhatsApp messages. They refuse to get the vaccine because they feel like there is a tracker being implanted in their body. And I'm just like, how, right? Where is a scannable device? So there's a lot of fear mongering, false information going on, saying if you get COVID vaccine, it's like some sort of a tracker in your body that the government can activate during any time, make you even sicker, have control over you. It seriously sounds like a really bad sci-fi film. Mm-hmm. So there's been so much misinformation surrounding that. And I think thankfully, I think many members of the AAPI community, when COVID started happening, I don't think they doubted the importance of a pandemic, because a lot of them are so dialed in to their colleagues in Asia. There were some scientists back in China who were the original whistleblowers when COVID-19 started happening. So they were able to see that firsthand. I remember my mom calling me even in the fall of 2019 saying there's something going on over there. Of course, I didn't know if that information was real, but alas, she was able to stock up on face masks and Clorox before everything else happened. So I think the Asian community is pretty dialed in on the importance of the pandemic, but unfortunately, when it comes to preventative measures like getting the vaccine, it has not been communicated correctly. And there's such a big distrust because in China, the media organization, there's only one, and it's obviously state-controlled media, right? So over here, there's a lot of big trust for major media institutions and even across media, even CDC. There's a huge population of Asian communities who don't believe in the CDC guidelines because they think somehow the Chinese government is involved with the CDC, giving them money back and forth, yada, yada, yada. So there's a lot of there's a lot of distrust. And I think for a long time, I always encourage my generation of AAPI members, right? Because our parents tend to have language barriers. They came over here. My generation, I really encourage everyone to start conversations at home, to get the conversation started, to just not ignore everyone. Listen, we all have an auntie, we all have an uncle, we've got grandparents, we have someone who's absorbing false information. And in the beginning, we may laugh it off and think, that's so funny. They really believe that. That's so funny. But when they feel more and more isolated, when they have no one to have a conversation with about these thoughts, about these false information, that's when they dig in deeper into the dark web. So I think everything starts at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And can I just add to that? Because my mother is one of those people that gets the conspiracy theories, the texting on the WhatsApp, and she'll send them to me. And a lot of times I never responded, but now I'm like, I have a role to play in this. And I'm like, Mom, literally stop, you're embarrassing me. Like, where did you get this from? There's no context to it. Why are you believing this chain mail, essentially? Why are you like, did you do the extra research? Like, you can't just be out here spreading this and sending it to people because, like I obviously where I work and the work that I do, I know that it's false, but who's to say the next person wouldn't? And so I think now I kind of put a little bit of fear in her that she stops and pauses before, she sends stuff along. But particularly what you were talking about, XiXi, with, just people being hesitant to take the vaccine or the booster for whatever reason, and it just being spread like wildfire. I saw Facebook post the other day from a former classmate of mine. We went to high school together, and she was essentially saying, the vaccine doesn't work. I had COVID and I was fine, and blah, 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 blah. And I was very triggered. I had crafted my response. I was ready to have my Twitter fingers going. I was like, you know what? Stop, relax, remember who you are, and save it for the group chat. And so I did post my response in the group chat, but what I ended up doing is I just reported that post for false information, because these tools do exist. They exist on pretty much any social media platform out there: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, I believe even Snapchat. They all have tools for you to, report misinformation. Like, let's let them handle it. Let's let them vet it. This is their job. And so let them handle it, because that kind of back and forth doesn't really solve anything, because when someone has their mind made up on something, it just turns into a political debate. And this is when the experts really need to come in. And thankfully, like I said, these COVID-19 resource and information centers exist for a reason. There are real people behind them. There are real people vetting them. There are scientists, and so on and so forth. And so I had to add to that. Sorry.
Vanessa, that is such a great point. And I also want to include that I want everyone to be aware of the filter that we individually have when we are consuming information, right? In journalism, it's called confirmation bias, which is you only read articles and you only interpret stories and you form your own narratives based on what you already believe in. So when you're reading something that is factual, but it goes against your belief system, you disregard it as false information. You somehow connect the dots in your own narrative, filtered perspective, so your mind can reject the information, right? Because even with the tremendous work that Facebook and Twitter has done in vetting the information, putting out the right facts, for a lot of AAPI members, they don't believe in it. When they see a little ticker and they see their friends' accounts getting banned left and right, they think it's, limiting their freedom of speech. The US is turning into a communist China. They can't speak the truth. And I'm just like, guys, please, can we just wake up here? Even though this article may not be, you might not think it's real, but still give it a shot, right? Read it to at least interpret for yourself. And a lot of the false information can be so triggering because they purposely write it in such a biased tone. Yes. with a lot of emotional words. Mm-hmm. I always say bad grammar, incorrect sentences, and emotional words, and a lot of exclamation marks, right? So when you see something that is so emotional, almost like it's pushing a specific agenda, not giving you two sides, that's when you have to step away and be like, wait, is mytruthnews.org, is that a legitimate organization? You know, because everyone can have a website. And you know, I've always said lies spread so much quicker than truth.
That's exactly right.
And the other thing about jumping in on posts and being and having you have crafted your post and gotten it ready to comment back, but actually by doing that and providing engagement on the post, you're putting it higher up the algorithm.
Exactly.
People are going to see it as well. So that's a great point to just hit that it's misinformation and let the platforms deal with it. Absolutely. Well, talking about that, I think that, you know, we should maybe move on to a discussion about efforts to combat misinformation, because one of the things that we really set out to do with this series together with the NAACP is talk about real takeaways that people can get from our series in terms of what they can do in their lives to address the things that we're discussing. So in this instance, what they can do in their lives to combat misinformation and disinformation. So maybe we could start with you, Vanessa. How are you tackling misinformation in policy in your policy efforts at the NAACP, as well as educational campaigns?
Yeah, so we're doing it on two different fronts, the offensive and the defensive. I always love a sports analogy, even though I know nothing about sports. So the offensive is, you know, we are going after the people who spread misinformation themselves. We have the Stop Hate for Profit Coalition that specifically, you know, goes after corporations like Facebook for not doing enough really to protect their users, particularly their users of color online, against hate speech, against misinformation, you know, against all of this stuff that's going on, whether it be for COVID-19, whether it be for elections, whether it just be from pushing forward stereotypes in general that negatively affects the Black community. And then on the defensive side, we're doing these things where we are, you know, spreading resources, like I said, resources, information, panels such as this, such as the teletown halls or the virtual town halls, and, you know, giving people a platform to, you know, spread information, spread resources for hosting vaccine clinics and booster clinics, but also allowing our communities as well to ask the questions and not feel sort of like judged, or because sometimes we're talking as if these are really, well, why don't you just get it? Why don't you just understand? It's not always like that. Allowing people to ask questions in sort of like a judgment-free zone and really come forward with their hesitancies, and seeing while other people are also having these hesitations and explaining through why and so on and so forth. And so that's sort of some of the things that we're working on. We're also working with, you know, legislators to make sure that all this information there is a digital divide, so not everyone's online. And so, like, what can we do more to have these sort of resources and information in our local communities, whether it be, again, for COVID-19 or for voting, and just sort of like tackling these, you know, hesitancies. Like I said, if you don't believe the vaccine works, but you believe the test that tells you have COVID, it's like, those are both science. And so, you know, let's talk about it a little bit more. Like, here are 3 different resources. And so that's one thing I say is, number one, if you're ever unsure about something, and it's very easy to say, oh, do your research, go on Google, but make sure you're getting it from at least 3 different sources and 3 different unrelated sources. That's the key. And then number 2, if you have a question, ask it. There's really no such thing as a stupid question. If you have a question, ask it, and make sure you're asking it to the right person. Don't ask it to Vanessa Mbonu on Facebook, you know, don't ask it to Jane Doe on WeChat or whatever, you know, ask it to someone who's actually accredited to give you an answer, and always get a second opinion as well. And so, you know, we only have one life to live. Ultimately, people are hesitant because they want to protect themselves. Just make sure you're protecting yourself in the best way possible. You know, fear can sometimes be comfortable, but you don't want it to be comfortable. You want to make sure that you're making the right decision, because you don't want 60 years from now, you're like, oh man, should have done that. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. So we've spoken a little bit about messaging. We've spoken a little bit about actions that you can take in terms of flagging media that you've seen. What other steps can we take on an interpersonal level to combat misinformation with our community members? XiXi, why don't you start?
Sure. I think for AAPI members, I think a huge factor is the language barrier, right? They're not consuming a lot of news straight from the source because again, all the news that they're reading has already been translated and filtered for them. So one thing, my media company, XiXi Media, we focus on a lot of stories that are often overlooked by mainstream media. We've been partnering up with Asian American Journalism Association, along with other various grassroots organizations, to make sure that the words are being translated correctly and members of our community can read the news for what it is without any bias filter, without any opinions being peppered in, because I think the consumption of news is really so important. And I really want to remind everyone out there, because we do live in the age of social media, to be a little conscious of the news that they're consuming through social media, because a lot of content creators and people out there are, this is a business, and sometimes they prioritize being the first to deliver something, or being the first to deliver something of shock value over, is this true? Is this factual? Is what I'm saying real? Right? So unfortunately, there are some people out there, and including organizations, who do just want to provide the shock value, get the like, get the comment, get the conversation going because it's controversial, get the internet lit, as opposed to being responsible about the type of information that they're putting out there. So I do want consumers and readers and all our viewers to be more aware of that. And to me, I think misinformation conversations start at home. Similar to Vanessa, I have family members texting me all day long during a call, during a shoot, sending me crazy graphics. And I used to just ignore it because I thought I was so busy and, this isn't serious. But throughout 2020, I was able to see how they felt isolated. And the more isolated they felt like they didn't have anyone to have a real conversation with, the more they got sucked in. So I do think conversations start at home.
Yes. Vanessa, have you got anything else to add?
Yeah, I know XiXi covered it, but I just want to add that it's important for all of us to understand that we all have influence, no matter how micro it is. We all have influence over somebody else, over an issue. And, the point is not to win an argument. The point is to save a life. And so understand that when you are having these conversations, they're never going to get it right then and there. It's very hard to change someone's mind or persuade someone to do something in 5 minutes or less. And so continue that conversation. Don't just have it one day, 2 days later, you check up on them and so on and so forth. And so I think it's important that, number one, we do have these conversations. They start at home. They start with our friends. We talk things through. And then number two, it's find a trusted source, especially for the Black community. There is a lot of distrust with the government. And so it's important to say, well, if you don't believe your mayor or the president or your senator, then who do you believe in? How can that person have an impactful conversation with you? And so people like celebrities, LeBron James, Beyonce, and so on and so forth, even influencers on YouTube, Twitter, they all have influence and they're all able to convince us of things. And sometimes that's a double-edged sword. And so I'm always if you won't believe President Biden, if you won't believe, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, will you believe this person? Will you believe, this YouTuber? But it's important that if you're listening to those micro influencers and content creators, that they're also backed by accredited people. And so if they're doing a program with the CDC or, some other health organization, the WHO, whatever it is, it's important that you see those things together. So you have that trusted face, you have that trusted voice, but then you also have the subject matter expert there as well, because you don't want to be led astray, because there are lots of people and lots of opinions. There's more opinions on the internet than facts. But you always want to make sure that if you're taking information, you're taking it in from a trusted source and a reputable source.
I feel like we could talk forever, but I am wary of time. but this is open to both of you. What other steps can we take as individuals or as a community to combat misinformation impacting Black and Brown communities online? Is there anything else?
Yeah, one thing that I will say, again, goes back to influence, is think about what role you may have played, or what role you're currently playing, or what role you will play in spreading misinformation. There's a common thing that I see on Twitter that says, retweets are not endorsements. So I retweet it, is that a conversation worth having in the first place? Like, if you're going to retweet it, are you quote tweeting it to tell people how that's wrong? It's kind of like, if you see something, say something. And so sometimes there's like, oh, it's social media, nobody will believe that, but it's like, no, it's not about, like I said, it's not about winning an argument. It's literally about saving someone's life, because the person that's spreading that misinformation may not get hurt, but you don't know who their audience is, and you don't know how far they will take it. And you don't know that maybe they are that person's trusted source, and look at them now, they've caught COVID. And so I always say, number one, before we point fingers at everybody else, point the finger directly to yourself and say, what have I done today to spread misinformation? And what have I done today to provide, resources and the truth, essentially?
I love that, Vanessa. That is so powerful. And to add on to what you're saying, I think words have so much power. Words truly do. We have to be careful how we explain things to people. We have to know when to speak up, even to our friends, because let's be real here. I'm sure we all know someone who is not vaccinated, won't be vaccinated anytime soon, and still does not believe in the vaccine. I even know people who still doesn't believe that COVID is anything different from a regular flu. So I think, instead of looking at it like we really have to combat misinformation on a large scale, for every single individual watching this right now, let's be a little mindful about the information that we are allowing into our mind. Let's fact check everything, do as much resource as possible. Only you can make the proper decision for yourself, but let's at least get the conversation started amongst your friends, amongst your family members. People always say don't talk politics during the holidays. I, for one, love going there. Because to me, we can't avoid these topics. It's embedded into our daily lives. Right? Everywhere we turn, everywhere we go, we cannot continue to operate as such a divided country. Yeah. We have to start bridging the gap. And to me, it really starts at home.
Particularly with healthcare, because healthcare shouldn't really be political. It's about looking after ourselves, isn't it? I completely agree. Yes. Well, thank you so much, ladies. We have had an incredible discussion. I cannot wait to write up these takeaways and get them out into the world as well. Is there anything else that either of you wants to say before we say goodbye?
Thank you so much for giving us this platform. And, if you have any more questions about, COVID-19, if you're one of the people that are hesitant, go to covidnomore.org.
We'll put all of the links up with the video as well, so that everybody can very easily get those resources.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Claire, for the amazing work the Webby Awards is doing. And Vanessa, you are incredible. I loved hearing about your story and your work.
Thank you so much, Gigi.
Yeah.
This was great.
Thank you.